Alien queens are not supposed to kneel. That was the first thought that crossed Daniel Carter's mind as he stared through the cracked visor of his helmet and watched the ruler of an interstellar empire slowly lower herself onto one knee in the pale dust before him. The wind howled across the empty canyon at nearly 40 miles per hour, carrying fine grains of silver sand that rattled softly against his armor, while the temperature gauge inside his suit blinked a warning at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. None of that mattered, because standing just a few feet away was the most powerful being Daniel had ever seen, and she was looking at him like he was the fragile one. Queen Elura of the Silurian Dominion towered over him even while kneeling, her turquoise skin reflecting the dim light of the twin suns setting behind the jagged ridgeline. Her armor looked less like metal and more like something grown, smooth plates layered over one another like the scales of a living creature. Daniel had heard stories about alien royalty before. Cold, untouchable, untiring. None of those stories mentioned the way her golden eyes softened when they settled on the tear in his suit just below his ribs. The suit's diagnostics flickered again, projecting a dull amber glow across the inside of his visor. Oxygen stable. Power at 21%. Structural integrity compromised. Daniel let out a slow breath that fogged the cracked glass. Relax, he muttered to himself in a hoarse voice. You've had worse days. The queen tilted her head slightly, as if she had heard the whisper even through the wind. For a moment neither of them spoke. Daniel could feel the cold creeping through the damaged plating of his suit, while the last light of the suns stretched long shadows across the canyon floor. When Elira finally moved, it was slow and deliberate, the way someone approaches a wild animal they are afraid might bolt. Her hand hovered near the torn section of armor, but did not touch it yet. Up close he noticed the faint glow beneath her skin, like soft turquoise light flowing through delicate patterns along her arm. Human, she said quietly, her voice deeper than he expected but calm in a way that seemed to quiet the storm around them. This injury happened when you moved me aside. Daniel gave a small shrug. That made the suit creak softly. You were standing in the wrong place, he replied. Seemed like a bad idea to leave you there. The queen studied him as though the answer had somehow complicated the universe. Behind her, the vast desert stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by the distant silhouette of her fallen transport ship, half buried in the sand. Daniel had crashed on this world less than an hour earlier. In that short time, he had met an alien queen, helped her avoid a dangerous creature native to the canyon, and discovered that saving royalty apparently came with the downside of a damaged flight suit and a very confused alien monarch staring at him like he had broken some ancient rule of the galaxy. Elira's gaze returned to the wound again, and this time her expression shifted into something unmistakable. Concern. You are hurt, she said softly. The wind gusted again, tugging at the edges of her cloak. Daniel managed a tired half-smile behind the visor. Yeah, he said. Looks that way. For a long moment the queen simply looked at him, and Daniel had the strange feeling that whatever happened next would change far more than either of them expected. Daniel Carter had met powerful people before, admirals, corporate executives, even a senator once during a supply contract on Mars, but none of them had ever looked at him the way Queen Elira was looking at him now, like he was some kind of puzzle that refused to fit the rules she had spent her entire life learning. The cold wind continued to sweep through the canyon, while the last glow of the twin suns slipped lower behind the stone ridges, painting the desert sky in deep shades of copper and violet. Daniel shifted slightly where he sat against a slab of dark rock, careful not to stress the damaged plating on his suit. The diagnostic panel flickered again inside his visor. Power 20%. Temperature dropping to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. He knew enough about alien planets to understand that desert worlds did not stay warm once the sun went down. Elira noticed the movement immediately. Her posture straightened, and the quiet authority that surrounded her returned like gravity, settling back into place. Even kneeling, she carried the presence of someone accustomed to commanding entire fleets. Yet there was still that same strange hesitation in her voice when she spoke again. You intervened when the canyon beast approached, she said slowly, as if repeating a fact she still did not fully accept. You pushed me aside despite knowing you could be injured. Daniel let out a short breath that fogged the inside of his visor again. Honestly, I did not have time to think about it, he answered. Where I come from, If someone is about to get flattened by something the size of a pickup truck, you move them out of the way. The Queen's golden eyes narrowed slightly in confusion. A pickup truck? Daniel chuckled weakly. Human ground vehicle. About 15 feet long. Heavy. Not something you want landing on you. Elira studied him for several seconds as the alien translation implant in her collar processed the unfamiliar term. Then she gave a small, thoughtful nod, as if mentally adjusting some ancient chart that categorized human behavior. Your species continues to contradict the intelligence reports we have gathered, she said quietly. Daniel raised an eyebrow behind the visor. That good or bad? Uncertain, she replied. The word hung in the cold air between them. For a moment neither of them spoke again. Somewhere in the distance the desert wind whistled through a narrow rock formation, producing a low hollow tone that echoed across the canyon like a distant horn. Daniel's suit chimed softly in his ear, reminding him again that his power reserves were slowly draining. He glanced toward the distant shape of his crashed shuttle half buried in the sand, nearly 300 yards away. The hull looked intact, but reaching it would take time and energy he was not sure he still had. Elira followed his gaze. Her eyes settled on the broken outline of the shuttle and then returned to him. That vessel is yours, she said. Yeah, Daniel replied. Or what is left of it? She rose to her full height then, nearly 8 feet tall, the flowing fabric of her cloak shifting softly in the wind. Daniel had to tilt his head back slightly to keep her in view. There was something almost luminous about her in the fading light, the turquoise patterns beneath her skin glowing faintly like distant starlight. The Queen looked once more at the tear in his armor, then toward the endless desert around them. When she spoke again, her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had just made a decision that would not be questioned. You will not remain here, she said. Daniel blinked. That was not really my plan. My transport vessel lies beyond the ridge, Elira continued. It still possesses functional shelter and medical systems. You will accompany me there. Daniel tilted his head slightly. That sounds suspiciously like an order. The Queen paused, considering his words, and then the faintest trace of a smile touched the corner of her lips. Then consider it a request, she said. One I strongly advise you accept. Daniel Carter had learned a long time ago that when an 8-foot alien queen told you that you were not staying somewhere, arguing about it was probably not the smartest survival strategy. The wind had grown colder now that the suns had slipped below the horizon, and the temperature reading inside his visor dropped again to 26 degrees Fahrenheit. The desert around them had changed from copper and violet into deep blue shadows stretching across miles of silent stone and sand. Daniel slowly pushed himself up from the rock he had been leaning against. The motion made the damaged section of his suit tighten uncomfortably across his ribs, and the internal sensors responded with a quiet warning tone. He ignored it. All right, he said, dusting a thin layer of silver sand from the front of his armor. Lead the way, Your Majesty. Queen Elira tilted her head slightly at the title. You address me with unusual familiarity, she observed. Daniel gave a small shrug. Back home we try not to make royalty too nervous around us. It keeps conversations easier. The Queen studied him again, the faint turquoise glow beneath her skin brightening slightly in the growing darkness. For a moment Daniel wondered if that glow was some form of biological communication, the alien equivalent of a facial expression. Then she turned toward the ridge that loomed above the canyon floor nearly 100 yards away. My vessel rests beyond that formation, she said. The walk will take approximately 4 minutes. Daniel glanced toward the slope she indicated. It rose at a steep angle of loose rock and hardened sand that looked much steeper than 4 minutes to someone wearing damaged armor. Still, the alternative was remaining in an open canyon while the temperature continued to fall. For minutes. He repeated. That sounds manageable. They began moving across the desert floor together. The sand crunched softly under Daniel's boots while Elira's steps made almost no sound at all, her long stride carrying her forward with a smooth balance that made the uneven ground look effortless. The only other sound was the steady hum of Daniel's suit systems adjusting to the cold. For several moments they walked in silence. Daniel found himself studying the alien queen from the corner of his visor display. Up close her movements had a strange grace that reminded him of deep water currents. Nothing about her seemed hurried or uncertain. She carried herself with the calm assurance of someone who had spent her life knowing that entire civilizations would move at her command. Yet here she was walking beside a human mechanic whose ship had just fallen out of the sky. The thought made him shake his head slightly. "May I ask something?" he said after a moment. Elira glanced back toward him without slowing. "You may. If you are the queen of a star empire," Daniel continued, "why were you alone out here in the middle of a canyon with nothing but that transport ship?" The question seemed to hang in the cold air for several seconds. When she finally answered, her voice was quieter than before. "Because sometimes even a queen must leave the protection of her fleets in order to understand the world she governs." Daniel raised an eyebrow behind his visor. That sounds like the kind of answer someone gives to avoid the real one. To his surprise, the queen let out a soft breath that almost sounded like amusement. "Perhaps," she said. They reached the base of the ridge a moment later. The slope rose sharply, nearly 30 feet of jagged stone leading up to the dark horizon line above them. Elira placed one hand against the rock and began climbing with the same calm precision she had shown while walking. Daniel followed more carefully, using the reinforced joints of his boots to keep balance on the shifting gravel. Halfway up the ridge his suit flickered again, projecting a new message across his visor. "Power 18%. Environmental heating reduced." He exhaled slowly. "You know," he said between breaths, "when I signed up for deep space salvage work, nobody mentioned climbing alien mountains in freezing weather." Elira reached the top first and turned back toward him, extending one glowing turquoise hand. "Then perhaps your species should negotiate better contracts," she replied calmly. Daniel looked at the offered hand for a second before accepting it. Her grip was surprisingly warm despite the cold air, steady and strong as she helped pull him onto the ridge. The moment he reached the top, Daniel finally saw what waited on the other side. Nearly 200 yards away in the open desert stood the sleek outline of a silver transport vessel partially buried in sand, its hull reflecting the faint light of the rising stars. Soft blue lights glowed along its surface, still alive. Daniel stared at it for a moment, impressed despite himself. "Well," he said quietly, "that is definitely better than my shuttle." The queen followed his gaze toward the ship. "It will keep you alive through the night," she said simply. Then she looked back at him, her golden eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "Assuming you make it there before your suit fails." Daniel Carter stared across the open desert at the silver transport vessel glowing softly under the rising stars, and silently hoped Queen Elira was right about one thing, that he would reach it before his suit decided to shut down completely. The distance looked shorter from the ridge than it probably was. Perhaps 200 yards of flat sand scattered with dark stone formations that cast long shadows in the moonless night. The wind had weakened slightly, but the cold had not, and the temperature indicator inside his visor dropped again to 24 degrees Fahrenheit. His suit reacted by lowering heating output to conserve power. A dull chill spread slowly through the metal plating around his ribs. Daniel exhaled slowly and watched the frost begin to form along the edges of the cracked visor. "All right," he muttered quietly. 200 yards. Even a guy with bad luck can manage that. Queen Elira had already started down the far side of the ridge, her long stride carrying her down the slope with steady balance. She paused halfway down and looked back at him. Even in the darkness, her golden eyes reflected faint starlight. "Your condition is deteriorating," she said calmly. "Your suit temperature regulation has reduced output by 40%. "Several frequencies," she replied. "My armor interprets them automatically." Daniel shook his head slowly as he began making his way down the slope. "Note to self," he said, "never assume alien queens cannot read your user manual." The gravel shifted under his boots as he descended the ridge. When he reached the desert floor again, he paused for a moment, letting his balance settle while the suit adjusted its pressure systems. The transport vessel ahead of them appeared even larger now that he could see it clearly against the night sky. Its hull curved smoothly like polished silver glass, nearly 80 feet long with faint blue illumination running along the edges of the landing struts. Unlike his shuttle, which now rested somewhere behind them in the canyon like a broken toolbox, this ship looked elegant and deliberate, designed by engineers who never expected their craft to crash into a desert. Elira resumed walking toward it. Daniel followed, each step producing a soft crunch of frozen sand beneath his boots. For the first minute, neither of them spoke. The silence of the desert stretched around them so completely that Daniel could hear the faint hum of the Queen's armor systems adjusting to the cold air. He glanced sideways toward her again. The turquoise glow beneath her skin had grown slightly brighter in the darkness, tracing delicate lines along her neck and arms like living circuitry. "So," Daniel said after a moment, his breath fogging the inside of his visor again. "Do all alien queens wander through frozen deserts alone, or is tonight just special?" Elira did not slow her pace, but her voice carried back to him easily across the wind. "I was not alone," she said. "My escort vessel accompanied me until the canyon storm interfered with our navigation systems." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Lightning. Magnetic interference. Something dramatic." "Electrical activity in the upper atmosphere disrupted our flight grid," she replied. "My transport was forced to land." Daniel nodded slowly. "That actually sounds exactly like the kind of day I am having." The blue lights along the transport vessel grew brighter as they approached within 100 yards. Sensors embedded in the hull appeared to recognize the Queen, because several additional lights illuminated along the entry ramp near the underside of the ship. The ramp began lowering slowly with a quiet mechanical hum. Daniel felt a wave of relief he did not realize he had been holding back. Shelter meant warmth. Warmth meant his suit might not become a metal freezer before morning. They were nearly halfway to the ship when his visor suddenly flashed another warning across the display. Power 15%. Core battery approaching critical threshold. Daniel inhaled sharply. The suit heating dropped again almost immediately. The cold bit deeper this time. Elira noticed the hesitation in his steps and stopped walking. She turned toward him, studying his posture carefully. The glow beneath her skin pulsed faintly, as if responding to some internal calculation. "Human," she said quietly. "You must move faster." Daniel gave a tired smile behind a cracked visor. "I am moving as fast as freezing legs allow." The Queen looked from him to the transport ramp waiting ahead of them, and then back again. For the first time since they met, a hint of urgency entered her voice. "Then allow me to assist you." Daniel frowned slightly. "Assist how exactly?" Elira stepped closer to him across the cold sand, her presence suddenly filling the quiet desert around them. The turquoise glow along her arms brightened gently as she extended one hand toward him. "By ensuring," she said softly, "that you reach my ship before that suit decides you will not." Daniel Carter looked at the turquoise hand Queen Elira had extended toward him, and for a moment, he simply stared at it through the cracked visor of his helmet. The desert wind whispered across the sand around them, while the transport vessel's ramp continued lowering in the distance nearly 90 yards away, glowing faintly blue against the dark horizon. His visor display pulsed again with another warning. Power 14%. Environmental heating minimal. Daniel let out a slow breath that fogged the inside of the glass, and tried not to think about what minimal heating actually meant in a place that had already dropped to 23 degrees Fahrenheit. "All right," he said quietly. "I officially admit the situation is getting a little inconvenient." Queen Elira remained standing in front of him, her posture calm and perfectly balanced as if the cold desert night meant nothing to her at all. The faint turquoise light beneath her skin moved slowly along her arms like gentle waves of bioluminescence. When Daniel did not immediately take her hand, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. Again with those steady golden eyes. "Human hesitation is curious," she said. "Your condition indicates urgency." Daniel gave a weak chuckle. "Back on Earth we have a saying," he replied. "If a royal alien offers to help you walk across a freezing desert, you should probably check whether your friends will believe the story later." For the first time since they met, Elira allowed a small smile to appear on her face. It was subtle and brief, but Daniel noticed it immediately. "Your survival seems more important than your future storytelling," she said calmly. Daniel finally reached forward and accepted her hand. The moment their hands touched, he felt the warmth immediately. Not artificial warmth like the heated lining of his suit, but natural warmth like sunlight on skin. It surprised him enough that he looked up at her again. "You are warm," he said before he could stop himself. "My physiology maintains stable temperature in extreme climates," she answered simply. "It allows my species to travel across many environments." Daniel nodded slowly. "That sounds extremely useful right now." The Queen stepped closer and shifted her grip slightly, placing his arm across her forearm to support some of his weight. The movement was smooth and controlled, almost effortless for someone nearly 8 feet tall. Daniel immediately noticed the difference. Walking had required constant effort, with his suit struggling to maintain balance and warmth. Now, with her steady support beside him, the strain on his legs eased slightly. They began moving toward the ship again. The sand crunched beneath Daniel's boots while Elira's steps remained nearly silent, guiding their pace across the cold desert floor. The blue lights along the transport ramp grew brighter with every yard they crossed. The hull sensors responded to the Queen's presence by illuminating additional landing lights that washed the surrounding sand in soft pale color. Daniel glanced toward the vessel again. "I have to admit," he said, "your ride is significantly nicer than mine." "It was designed for extended diplomatic travel," she replied. "Comfort is considered a strategic advantage." Daniel laughed quietly. "I am beginning to see the benefits of royal transportation." Another gust of wind swept across the desert, colder this time. His visor flickered again. "Power 13%. The suit responded by lowering heating output even further. Daniel felt the cold creeping deeper through the armor joints. Elira sensed the change immediately. Her grip tightened slightly as she increased their pace. The ship's ramp was now less than 40 yards away, fully extended and waiting. Soft interior lighting glowed from within the open hatch above. Daniel focused on that light the way a tired traveler focuses on a cabin window during a winter storm. Shelter, warm air, systems that would not fail in the middle of the night. "Almost there," he muttered quietly. Elira glanced down at him. "Your determination is impressive," she said. "Or stubborn," Daniel replied. "My people are known for both." They reached the base of the ramp seconds later. The smooth metal surface reflected the pale desert starlight as it rose gently toward the open hatch 20 feet above. Warm air drifted downward from the interior of the ship, carrying the faint scent of sterile metal and circulating oxygen. Daniel stepped onto the ramp with relief that felt almost overwhelming. The moment his boots touched the surface, the suit sensors detected the temperature change and stabilized slightly. "Power 12%. Systems holding." Daniel looked back at the endless dark desert behind them, and then forward toward the glowing interior of the alien vessel. "Your Majesty," he said quietly as they began climbing the ramp together. "I think your request was a very good idea." Elira said nothing at first. She simply guided him upward toward the light of her ship, her steady presence beside him like a quiet promise that the freezing desert would not claim him tonight. Warm air rolled down the interior corridor of the transport vessel the moment Daniel Carter crossed the threshold of the open hatch, and the sudden change in temperature felt so dramatic that for a second, he simply stood there at the top of the ramp, letting the heat soak through the frozen joints of his damaged suit. The air inside the ship smelled faintly metallic but clean, circulating through quiet ventilation panels hidden along the curved walls. Soft white lights illuminated the entry chamber, reflecting off smooth silver surfaces that looked more grown than built, as if the vessel had been shaped rather than assembled. Daniel exhaled slowly and watched the frost along the inside edge of his cracked visor begin to fade. The suit responded immediately to the warmer environment. Power 11%. Temperature stabilizing. He almost laughed from relief. Queen Elira guided him forward into the chamber before the ramp sealed behind them with a gentle mechanical hum. The sound echoed softly through the quiet interior as the outer hatch closed against the freezing desert night. Daniel glanced back just in time to see the final sliver of cold darkness disappear as the door sealed completely. The difference was immediate. The ship felt calm and controlled compared to the harsh world outside. Elira released her supportive grip only after confirming that Daniel could stand without assistance. She turned toward a circular console embedded into the wall beside the hatch. The turquoise glow beneath her skin brightened slightly as she placed her hand above the surface. Symbols of soft blue light appeared instantly beneath her fingers. The vessel responded with a low melodic tone as internal systems activated around them. "Environmental stabilization complete," she said quietly as she read the display. Daniel leaned one shoulder against the curved wall beside the hatch, letting the warmth reach deeper into his body while his suit slowly recalibrated its temperature systems. The interior of the ship looked far more advanced than anything he had ever worked on in salvage operations. The walls curved upward seamlessly toward a high ceiling nearly 15 feet above them. and narrow channels of light ran through the structure like glowing veins. Even the floor beneath his boots felt slightly resilient, absorbing impact with a soft response that suggested some form of adaptive material. "Your ship is impressive," Daniel said after a moment, his voice echoing faintly through the chamber. "It feels more like a laboratory than a transport." Elira glanced toward him while still working at the console. "This vessel serves both purposes," she replied. "Diplomatic travel often requires immediate medical capability." Daniel lifted an eyebrow behind his visor. "That sounds reassuring considering the condition of my suit." The Queen studied him for a moment, her golden eyes moving slowly across the damage to his armor. The tear across his ribs was now clearly visible beneath the bright interior lighting, the outer plating bent slightly inward where the canyon creature had struck earlier. Though the suit had absorbed most of the impact, the damage had compromised its temperature regulation and structural balance. Elira stepped closer again, examining the injury with careful attention. The faint turquoise glow along her arm brightened as she raised one hand toward the damaged section, but paused before touching it. "You will remove the armor," she said calmly. Daniel straightened slightly. "That is not usually the first thing I do on a stranger spaceship." The Queen's expression remained composed. "Your suit power reserves are nearly exhausted," she replied. "If the internal systems shut down while you are still wearing it, the cold stress your body has already endured will worsen." Daniel considered that for a moment. The suit chimed again as if agreeing with her assessment. "Power 10%. Environmental heating minimal." He sighed quietly. "All right," he said. "When the alien queen with the advanced medical ship gives advice, the smart human listens." Elira turned and gestured toward a doorway at the far end of the chamber. Beyond it, Daniel could see a softly lit room filled with curved equipment stations and suspended holographic displays that glowed faintly blue. "The medical suite is this way," she said. Daniel pushed himself away from the wall and followed her slowly across the chamber floor. The warmth of the ship continued to seep through the joints of his armor with every step, easing the stiffness that had begun to settle into his muscles. As they entered the medical room, the lighting adjusted automatically, brightening around a central examination platform built from the same smooth, silver material as the rest of the vessel. Daniel looked around with quiet appreciation. "I have to say," he muttered, "this beats spending the night in a freezing canyon." Elira stopped beside the platform and turned toward him again. The calm authority in her voice returned fully as she spoke. "Sit," she said gently. "Your recovery begins now." Daniel Carter lowered himself onto the smooth examination platform with slow, careful movements, while the warmth of the alien medical chamber continued to seep through the damaged armor of his suit. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of ship systems running somewhere behind the curved walls. Soft white light shifted overhead as the vessel's sensors adjusted to his presence. The platform beneath him responded instantly, rising slightly to support his weight and aligning with the height of Queen Elira as she stepped closer. Daniel rested his hands on the edge of the platform and exhaled slowly while his visor display flickered again. "Power 9%. System stable but limited." He shook his head. "My suit and I have been through worse," he said quietly. "But I will admit it is getting tired." Elira studied the armor closely. Up close, the damage was even more obvious beneath the bright medical lighting. The outer plating had been pushed inward along the lower ribs, and the internal heating channels had been partially severed. The Queen moved toward a control panel built directly into the wall beside the platform and placed her glowing hand above it. The room responded immediately. Thin beams of blue light formed in the air around Daniel's torso, scanning slowly across the damaged armor, while soft tones echoed from the surrounding equipment. Daniel looked down at the lights with curiosity. "Your medical system seems very interested in me," he said. "It is evaluating your condition," Elira replied. Her voice remained calm, but focused as she watched the diagnostic readings forming above the platform. Several translucent holographic displays appeared in front of her, filled with alien symbols that shifted rapidly as the system analyzed Daniel's suit and the body beneath it. She read them in silence for a few seconds. "Your armor prevented serious internal injury," she said at last. "However, the environmental regulation system is failing and your body temperature dropped significantly during your exposure to the desert." Daniel nodded slowly. "That explains the shivering earlier." The queen stepped closer again and gently placed one hand on the locking seam of his chest plate. The turquoise glow beneath her skin brightened slightly as she examined the release mechanism. "Your armor must be removed so the medical system can stabilize you," she said. Daniel hesitated for half a second, not out of distrust, but because removing a suit in unfamiliar technology always carried a small risk. But the warmth of the room and the calm certainty in Elira's voice made the decision easier. "All right," he said quietly. "Just promise me your machine will not decide to dissect the visiting human." For a brief moment Elira looked genuinely puzzled. Then she realized he was joking, and a faint hint of amusement touched her expression again. "It will not," she replied. With a careful motion, she activated the release points along the front of the suit. The magnetic locks disengaged with a soft series of clicks, and the heavy chest plate separated from the rest of the armor. Warm air from the room reached the inner layers of Daniel's flight suit for the first time since the crash. The difference was immediate. His muscles relaxed slightly as circulation returned to normal temperature. The medical scanner adjusted its beams automatically, focusing now on the underlying fabric where the armor had been damaged. Elira studied the new readings carefully. Her expression grew more serious as the holographic display revealed the full extent of the impact the suit had absorbed earlier in the canyon. She lifted her hand slowly and hovered it just above the area of Daniel's ribs without touching. The turquoise light beneath her skin pulsed softly, as if responding to the medical system's data. "You acted to protect me without calculation," she said quietly. Daniel leaned back slightly on the platform and gave a small tired shrug. It seemed like the right thing to do. The queen looked at him for a long moment. Something thoughtful moved behind her golden eyes as she processed that simple answer. The silence of the medical chamber deepened around them while the scanners continued their gentle work. Finally she spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Then it is my responsibility to ensure your recovery," she said. "Because your injury occurred while protecting the life of the queen of this vessel." Daniel smiled faintly. "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds very official." Elira did not smile this time. Instead, she activated another control on the panel beside the platform. The medical system responded immediately. A curved arm of advanced instruments descended quietly from the ceiling above Daniel, glowing with controlled blue light as it prepared to begin treatment. The queen remained standing beside him, watching every movement of the machine with steady focus. For the first time since the crash, Daniel realized something unusual. The ruler of an alien empire was personally overseeing the care of a stranded human mechanic, as if his well-being mattered far more than protocol. The medical instrument lowered from the ceiling moved with quiet precision until it hovered a few inches above Daniel Carter's torso, its curved surface glowing with a soft blue light that reflected across the polished floor of the chamber. The machine made no harsh sounds, only a gentle harmonic tone that seemed designed to calm rather than alarm. Daniel leaned back slightly on the platform and watched it with cautious curiosity. The warmth of the room had already begun to loosen the stiffness in his muscles, and for the first time since the crash, he no longer felt the biting cold in his bones. The suit shell that had protected him in the canyon now rested in separated pieces beside the platform, its power indicator blinking weakly at 8% before finally shutting down completely. Daniel glanced toward it and shook his head. "You did your best," he murmured quietly. Queen Elira remained beside the platform, observing the medical display projected in the air before her. The glowing symbols shifted continuously as the scanner analyzed Daniel's condition in greater detail. The turquoise glow beneath her skin pulsed slowly, reflecting off the silver walls of the chamber like distant ocean light. She looked from the display to Daniel again, her expression thoughtful. "Your physiology is remarkably resilient," she said after several seconds. Daniel smiled faintly. "Humans are good at surviving uncomfortable situations." The scanning instrument responded by releasing a gentle beam of warm light across the injured section of his ribs. Daniel felt a mild, tingling sensation through the fabric of his inner suit, but no pain. Only a spreading warmth that seemed to reach deeper beneath the surface of his skin. The machine adjusted its position automatically, tracing the outline of the earlier impact and stabilizing the surrounding tissue. Daniel watched the process with quiet fascination. "I have to admit," he said, "this is much more advanced than anything in the salvage fleet." Elira nodded slightly. The medical technologies of my people were designed for exploration across hostile environments, she explained. Our physicians learned long ago that survival in distant systems depends on rapid treatment and careful observation. Daniel considered that for a moment while the scanner continued its work. That explains why you travel with a full medical suite, he said. The Queen looked at him again, her golden eyes steady but reflective. A ruler responsible for many worlds cannot ignore the value of life, she said softly. The medical instrument emitted another gentle tone as it completed the first phase of its analysis. A new series of holographic indicators appeared above Daniel's chest, displaying the stabilization of his body temperature and circulation. The warmth spreading through his torso now felt steady and comfortable rather than artificial. Daniel let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. That feels significantly better, he admitted. Elira watched the readings carefully. Your recovery has begun, she said. However, your body must rest while the system completes cellular repair. Daniel shifted slightly on the platform, testing the movement of his ribs. The soreness remained, but the sharp discomfort he had felt earlier was fading. Resting on an alien queen's ship is definitely not how I expected today to end, he said with a quiet laugh. Elira tilted her head slightly at that remark. Unexpected events often reveal truths that routine days cannot, she replied. Daniel looked at her curiously. That sounds philosophical. For the first time since entering the chamber, the Queen allowed a brief, thoughtful pause before answering. Perhaps it is, she said. The medical scanner slowly withdrew upward toward the ceiling, its work for the moment complete. The room returned to its quiet, steady glow while the holographic displays continued monitoring Daniel's condition. Elira stepped closer to the platform again and studied him with a calmer expression than before. Human Daniel Carter, she said gently. Your actions in the canyon protected my life. Daniel shrugged lightly. Someone had to move you. The Queen's gaze remained steady. Most beings would have chosen self-preservation. Daniel smiled faintly and looked toward the curved ceiling lights above. Maybe, he said, but humans have a habit of making strange decisions when someone else is in danger. Elira remained silent for several seconds, absorbing that answer. Then she looked at the quiet medical display again and spoke in a softer tone than before. Your decision has changed the course of this night more than you realize. Daniel Carter rested against the gently inclined surface of the medical platform while the quiet systems of the alien vessel continued monitoring his condition with patient precision. The warmth in the chamber had settled into a comfortable, steady temperature, somewhere around 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And for the first time since his shuttle had fallen out of the sky, he no longer felt like the cold of the desert was still clinging to his bones. The earlier tension in his breathing had faded, replaced by the slow, even rhythm that comes when the body finally realizes it is safe. Above him, the ceiling lights glowed softly like distant stars trapped behind polished glass. Queen Elira remained standing beside the platform, watching the floating holographic display with the focused calm of someone accustomed to understanding complex systems at a glance. The turquoise patterns beneath her skin pulsed faintly in the quiet room, their glow shifting gently as the ship's instruments adjusted around them. Daniel followed her gaze to the holographic readout that hovered near the platform. Although most of the alien symbols meant nothing to him, the simple color indicators were easy enough to understand. His temperature had stabilized. His pulse had slowed. Even the internal strain along his ribs had begun to diminish. Your technology works fast, he said after a moment. Elira inclined her head slightly. The system is designed to accelerate natural recovery, she replied. Daniel considered that answer with a thoughtful expression. That sounds like the opposite of most medical treatments I know, he said. Usually the doctor tells you to slow down and let the body catch up. The Queen looked at him for a moment, studying the quiet humor in his tone. Your species values patience, she said. Mine values adaptation. Daniel smiled faintly and rested his hands behind his head while he looked up at the ceiling lights again. Maybe that is why humans take so long to understand the universe, he said. We like to think things through before changing them. Elira's gaze shifted toward him again, thoughtful but calm. And yet you changed the outcome of the canyon without hesitation, she said. Daniel shrugged lightly. Thinking is useful, he replied. But sometimes you just act. The medical platform adjusted slightly beneath him, lowering a fraction of an inch as the system recalibrated its support structure. The change was so smooth it barely registered, but Daniel felt the shift and glanced toward the instrument panel beside the platform. The scanning arm that had treated his injury earlier now remained folded near the ceiling like a resting mechanical bird. The quiet hum of the ship's power core filled the background of the room with a low, comforting vibration. "So what happens next?" Daniel asked after a few seconds. Elira turned toward the central console again and reviewed several additional lines of shifting symbols. "Your body requires time to complete the repair process," she said. "The system will continue stabilizing your internal temperature and circulation for several hours." Daniel nodded slowly. "Which means I am officially a guest on an alien queen's ship until morning." "You are a protected passenger," she corrected gently. Daniel laughed quietly. "That sounds even more official." For a moment the two of them shared the quiet of the chamber without speaking. Outside the vessel the desert night stretched endlessly across the frozen landscape, but inside the ship everything remained controlled and calm. Finally Elira looked toward the large observation window set into the far wall of the medical suite. Beyond the transparent surface, the distant stars of the system shone clearly against the dark sky. She walked toward the window slowly and stopped there, gazing outward. Daniel watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You said earlier that my decision changed the course of the night," he said. "What did you mean by that?" The queen remained looking out at the stars for several seconds before answering. The turquoise glow along her skin dimmed slightly, as if responding to the thought forming in her mind. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quieter tone than before. "Because before tonight," she said slowly, "the records of my people described humans as unpredictable explorers who move through the galaxy with little regard for the consequences of their presence." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a very polite way of saying we are trouble." Elira turned slightly toward him, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the distant stars. "Perhaps," she said. "But now the first human I have met personally chose to protect a stranger at the risk of his own safety." Daniel smiled faintly. "That probably makes your intelligence reports slightly confusing." The queen studied him for a moment longer, and then she gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." Daniel Carter remained on the medical platform for several quiet minutes after Queen Elira spoke, letting the meaning of her words settle slowly in his mind, while the steady warmth of the chamber continued easing the last traces of cold from his body. The ship around them felt almost peaceful now, its systems humming softly in the background like a living organism breathing in slow, measured rhythm. The observation window beside the queen framed a vast spread of distant stars that seemed brighter in the clear desert sky than anywhere Daniel had seen in human space. For a moment he simply watched them, wondering how many of those lights hid civilizations that had never heard of Earth. "Your reports were not entirely wrong," Daniel said eventually. "Humans do tend to wander into places we probably should not." Elira turned slightly away from the window and regarded him again with thoughtful calm. The soft turquoise glow beneath her skin reflected faintly against the polished floor of the chamber. "Curiosity is not a flaw," she said. "It is the beginning of discovery." Daniel chuckled quietly at that. "That is exactly what our explorers say right before something goes wrong." The queen stepped away from the window and approached the platform again, her long stride quiet against the smooth surface of the floor. The medical display hovering above Daniel shifted automatically as she moved closer, presenting a new set of readings in response to her presence. She studied them carefully for several seconds before speaking again. "Your recovery is progressing faster than expected," she said. "The system indicates that your body temperature and circulation have returned to stable levels." Daniel lifted one arm experimentally and flexed his fingers. The stiffness he had felt earlier was nearly gone. "I feel better already," he admitted. "Still sore, but much better than freezing in that canyon." Elira nodded once in quiet confirmation. "You will remain here until the system completes its repair cycle," she said. "Your ribs require additional time to recover from the impact your armor absorbed." Daniel gave a small, resigned sigh. "Doctor's orders," he said. "I suppose I should not argue with alien medical science." The queen watched him for a moment longer before her gaze shifted toward the silent pieces of his damaged armor resting beside the platform. She walked toward them slowly and examined the fractured plating with careful interest. The outer surface still bore the mark where the canyon creature had struck earlier, the metal bent inward but not broken. She ran her hand lightly across the surface, studying the design. "Your equipment performed well," she said quietly. Daniel followed her gaze toward the armor and smiled faintly. "That suit has been with me through a lot of rough landings," he said. "I rebuilt half the systems myself after a job on Europa Station." Elira looked back at him with mild curiosity. "You repair your own equipment?" "Most salvage pilots do," Daniel replied. "When you spend enough time alone in deep space, you either learn to fix things yourself or you stop flying." The Queen seemed to consider that explanation with quiet respect. "Self-reliance is a valuable trait," she said. Daniel shrugged lightly. "It keeps you alive." For a few seconds the two of them stood in comfortable silence again while the medical systems continued their quiet work. Finally, Elira turned back toward the observation window, though this time she remained closer to the platform. Her gaze drifted once more toward the distant stars beyond the ship. "There is something else. Your actions have changed," she said softly. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "More changes?" She nodded slowly. "My escort fleet will arrive within several hours," she explained. "They will expect to find me alone on this vessel." Daniel blinked in mild surprise. "And instead they will find a human mechanic relaxing in your medical suite." The Queen's expression remained composed but thoughtful. "Yes," she said. Daniel leaned back slightly on the platform and looked toward the ceiling lights again, considering the situation. "That sounds like it might raise a few questions," he admitted. Elira turned toward him fully now, her golden eyes steady and calm. "It will," she said. Then, after a brief pause, she added quietly, "And the answers may influence how my people see yours from this moment forward." Daniel Carter lay quietly on the medical platform, while Queen Elira's final words settled in the air between them. And for the first time since his shuttle had fallen out of the sky, he began to understand that the strange situation he had stumbled into might be larger than a simple rescue in a frozen canyon. The soft lights of the medical chamber reflected across the silver walls while the distant stars beyond the observation window remained steady and silent, watching the small scene unfolding inside the alien vessel. Daniel slowly folded his arms behind his head again and looked up at the ceiling while considering what she had said. "That is a lot of responsibility for a mechanic who was just trying to avoid freezing," he said after a moment. Queen Elira stood near the observation window, her tall silhouette outlined by the faint starlight shining through the glass. The turquoise glow beneath her skin had dimmed slightly now that the immediate urgency of the situation had passed, but it still moved in slow patterns along her arms and neck, like quiet currents beneath the surface of deep water. She turned back toward him with calm composure. "History often changes through moments that appear small at first," she said. Daniel smiled faintly at that. "That sounds like something a teacher would say right before giving a difficult assignment." The Queen's expression softened slightly, though the quiet seriousness in her eyes remained. "Your presence here will raise questions among my commanders," she explained. "Some of them may not welcome the explanation." Daniel lifted one eyebrow. "Because humans are still the unpredictable explorers in your reports?" Elira inclined her head slightly. "Yes," she said. Daniel considered that quietly while the medical system continued its steady monitoring around him. The platform beneath him emitted a soft pulse of warmth as it adjusted to maintain the optimal temperature for his recovery. He flexed his fingers again and found that even the lingering soreness along his ribs had faded into a dull, manageable ache. After several seconds, he looked back toward the Queen. "Then tell them the truth," he said simply. Elira studied him carefully. "And what truth would you present?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "That your ship had a visitor who happened to be human, and that visitor made a decision any decent person would make." The Queen remained silent for a moment, considering that answer. Outside the observation window, a faint streak of light crossed the distant sky, possibly a meteor or perhaps one of the many satellites orbiting the frozen world below. When she spoke again, her voice carried a thoughtful tone. "Many leaders would present a more strategic explanation," she said. Daniel chuckled quietly. "I am not a leader," he replied. "I fix broken ships and try not to crash my own too often." Elira walked slowly back toward the platform, her steps quiet across the smooth floor. She stopped beside him and looked down at the medical display hovering in the air above his chest. The indicators continued to show stable readings. Your humility does not change the significance of your actions, she said gently. Daniel tilted his head slightly, so he could see her more clearly from the platform. You know, he said, if your fleet shows up and sees me lying here while you stand over me with medical equipment, they might assume something much more dramatic happened. For the first time in several minutes, Elira allowed a brief amused breath to escape her lips. Then perhaps we should ensure your condition improves quickly, she said. Daniel laughed softly. That would probably help. The medical system chimed quietly at that moment as a new update appeared in the holographic display. The repair cycle had progressed further, and the system now indicated that Daniel would be able to stand and move normally within the next hour. Elira glanced at the reading and nodded once in quiet satisfaction. Your recovery continues ahead of schedule, she said. Daniel stretched his arms slightly and let out a comfortable breath. That is good news, he said. Then he looked toward the observation window again, imagining the distant fleet she had mentioned approaching through the darkness of space. When your escort arrives, he added thoughtfully, I hope they are not too surprised to find a human guest. Elira met his gaze with calm certainty. They will be surprised, she said. Then after a brief pause she added softly, but they will also understand that you are under my protection. Daniel Carter slowly sat up on the medical platform for the first time since the treatment cycle had begun, testing the strength in his torso while the quiet instruments of the alien medical suite continued their patient monitoring around him. The warmth of the chamber felt natural now rather than overwhelming, and the tight pressure he had felt along his ribs earlier had softened into something manageable, the dull reminder of an impact that his armor had absorbed long before the medical system had begun its work. The holographic display hovering above the platform adjusted automatically when it detected the movement, projecting a series of new readings in calm pulses of blue light. Queen Elira watched the change carefully from beside the platform, her golden eyes following the shifting symbols with the composed focus of someone who had learned long ago that details often determined outcomes. Daniel rolled his shoulders slowly and exhaled with quiet satisfaction. I think your medical system deserves a compliment, he said. Back home this kind of recovery would take days. Elira inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Your body responded well to the stabilization process, she replied. Your species appears to possess remarkable resilience. Daniel smiled faintly at that and placed his feet carefully on the floor beside the platform. The material beneath his boots adjusted subtly to his weight, the flexible surface providing support as he stood upright for the first time since entering the chamber. He paused there for a moment, letting his balance settle while the medical display continued scanning his condition. The quiet hum of the ship's systems surrounded them like the steady breathing of a living structure. That feels much better, he said after a moment. Elira stepped closer and examined the readings once more. The turquoise glow beneath her skin brightened slightly as she reviewed the final lines of data appearing in the air between them. Your temperature, circulation, and structural stability have returned to acceptable levels, she said calmly. The repair cycle is nearly complete. Daniel stretched his arms once more, testing the range of motion along his ribs. The soreness remained, but it no longer restricted his movement. I will take acceptable, he said with a quiet laugh. The queen allowed herself a small, thoughtful pause before speaking again. You may walk normally now, she said. Daniel stepped away from the platform and crossed the short distance toward the observation window that overlooked the desert outside. The stars still burned steadily across the sky beyond the glass, but something new had appeared among them. At first he thought it might be another meteor streaking across the upper atmosphere, but then the point of light shifted position with deliberate control. Then another appeared, and another. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched the pattern forming in the sky. I think your escort has arrived, he said quietly. Elira moved beside him and looked through the observation window as well. In the darkness above the desert, several distant shapes were emerging from the upper atmosphere, their hulls reflecting faint starlight as they slowed their descent into orbit. Even from this distance Daniel could see the controlled symmetry of the formation. It was unmistakably a fleet. The queen's expression remained calm, but the turquoise glow beneath her skin brightened slightly as the vessels continued their approach. Yes, she said softly. They have come sooner than expected. Daniel folded his arms loosely while he studied the distant ships hovering high above the planet. Their silhouettes were far larger than the transport vessel he now stood inside. "Your commanders are going to have questions," he said. Alyra nodded slowly while watching the fleet stabilize in orbit. "They will," she replied. Daniel glanced toward her with a curious smile. "And you are still planning to tell them the truth?" The queen turned her head slightly to meet his gaze, her golden eyes steady and composed. "Yes," she said simply. Daniel looked back toward the stars again and exhaled. Quietly. "Well," he said after a moment, "that is going to be an interesting conversation." Alyra remained silent for a few seconds as the distant fleet settled into position above the world. Then she spoke again with calm certainty. "Perhaps," she said, "but tonight they will also learn something important about the humans standing beside me." Daniel Carter stood beside Queen Alyra at the observation window while the distant fleet settled into its silent formation above the frozen world, and for a long moment neither of them spoke as the enormous shapes of the escort vessels stabilized against the stars. From the surface, they appeared like quiet silver constellations slowly arranging themselves in deliberate patterns across the night sky. Each ship moved with controlled precision, guided by unseen thrusters that adjusted their positions with barely noticeable pulses of light. Daniel rested one hand against the cool frame of the observation window and watched the formation complete itself with professional curiosity. He had spent years flying salvage missions across human space, and he understood the language of spacecraft movement. These vessels were not merely arriving. They were positioning themselves with discipline. "Your people do not travel lightly," he said quietly. Queen Alyra remained still beside him, her gaze steady as she observed the final ship entering orbit. The faint turquoise glow beneath her skin brightened slightly in response to the activity beyond the glass, reflecting softly along the polished surfaces of the medical chamber. "The escort exists to ensure the safety of their queen," she replied. Daniel smiled faintly. "Looks like they are very serious about that job." Outside the window, a new line of lights appeared along the underside of one of the larger ships as it rotated slowly above the desert. Its massive hull briefly reflected the starlight in a wide arc that illuminated the thin clouds drifting high in the atmosphere. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That is a lot of ships to greet one stranded mechanic," he said. Alyra turned toward him slightly, her expression calm but thoughtful. "They did not come for you," she said gently. Daniel laughed softly. "I figured that part out." The queen watched him for a moment longer before speaking again. "However, they will soon learn that you are here," she added. Daniel nodded and returned his gaze to the fleet above. The sight of it no longer felt intimidating. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful, as if the enormous vessels had become silent witnesses to the quiet conversation inside the transport ship. "Then I guess tonight is going to rewrite a few reports," he said. Alyra studied him carefully. "Yes," she said. Daniel leaned his shoulder lightly against the frame of the window while the steady hum of the vessel surrounded them. The medical system behind him continued its quiet monitoring, but he no longer felt like a patient recovering from a near disaster. He felt like someone standing at the edge of a moment that might travel much farther than either of them expected. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if your commanders ask why you protected a human stranger, you can tell them the truth too." Alyra raised one eyebrow slightly. "And what truth would that be?" Daniel looked toward the distant fleet one more time before answering. "That sometimes survival depends on the simplest rule humans know," he said. "When someone is in trouble, you help them." The queen remained silent for several seconds after hearing that answer. The turquoise glow beneath her skin dimmed slightly as she considered the thought. Then she turned her gaze back toward the stars where the ships of her empire waited quietly above the world. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a calm certainty that seemed larger than the room around them. "Then perhaps your species understands something many civilizations forget," she said. Daniel glanced at her curiously. "What is that?" Alyra's golden eyes reflected the distant lights of the fleet as she answered. "That strength is not proven by power alone," she said softly. "Sometimes it is proven by the choice to protect another life." Daniel smiled faintly and looked out at the stars again. The fleet remained motionless above the desert, waiting for the command of the queen standing beside him. For the first time since the crash, he felt certain that the night had not simply been an accident of circumstance. It had been the beginning of something else entirely. And somewhere beyond the silent desert, History had quietly changed direction because one human had made a simple choice.